Act 1. Albert Einstein, a man of extraordinary intellect and insatiable curiosity, stood at the chalkboard, furiously scribbling equations. His brow furrowed in deep concentration, his mind leaping between concepts of space and time. Einstein was lost in thought, his eyes dancing across the board as he jotted down equations and equations. The room was silent, except for the scratch of his chalk against the board, as well as an occasional scoff or mumble from the brilliant mathematician. Occasionally, the man broke into a wide grin, as if he had just had an epiphany. His fingers flew across the board, drawing intricate symbols and formulas. He paused every now and then, leaning back to study his work before continuing. The air in the room was still and stuffy as Albert Einstein finished his latest flurry of calculations. He loved being in this zone of intense concentration and creative inspiration. The scent of this old library, the chalk dust that clung to his fingers and his clothing, that electric sensation that he felt any time he could be alone with his thoughts. In moments like these, his hand could barely keep up with his mind. His eyes shone brightly, and he took a deep breath, clearly exhilarated by the breakthrough he had made.
Eureka! That's it! That's it!
Einstein exclaimed, stepping back from the blackboard to admire his work. His equations stretched across the board, a complex web defying understanding. He finally stopped writing. He paused, his eyes widening in shock as he looked at what he had written. He ran his fingers through his hair, leaving it standing on end in every direction.
I've done it,
he muttered, still partially in disbelief that what he had spent months deliberating could now be understood so plainly.
E equals mc squared.
His voice filled with wonder. The words hung in the air, a simple equation that held within it the key to an entirely new understanding of the universe. Einstein's mind raced, trying to comprehend the full implications of what he had discovered. As the grand theory began to take shape in his mind, he reached over to his desk to grab his chalk, but it was not where he had left it. Had it rolled off his desk? He bent over, inspecting the floor but finding nothing. Albert got up and went back to retrieve a new piece of chalk when he was suddenly met with a new problem. He paused. The chalk was hovering in mid-air. Einstein's eyes widened in surprise as he saw the chalk floating in front of him, seemingly fixed to nothing. The chalk continued to hover in the air, defying all logical explanation. Einstein's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. He reached out to touch the chalk, but his fingers could barely make contact before passing right through it. He narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing the chalk with his critical gaze. He reached out again to touch it, and this time his fingers passed right through the chalk, as if it was not really even there. The room was still silent, save from Albert's heavy breathing. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning for any sign of what could be causing this strange phenomenon. Confounded and light-headed, Albert reached out to lean against his desk. The desk seemed to shift under his hand, no longer solid, and he stumbled to the floor. Looking back at the desk in surprise, he saw it, the chalk and everything else, flicker and waver like a mirage. The room around him seemed to warp and twist. Colors and shapes blurred, and Einstein felt himself being tugged and compressed by time itself. The equations on his blackboard dissolved into a whirlwind of numbers and symbols, spinning around him in a dizzying vortex. He tried to stand up, but his foot met only air as the floor beneath him seemed to disappear. Reality was collapsing. He fell through the floor, his heart racing with shock and confusion. As Albert Einstein fell through what used to be solid ground, he felt a sense of weightlessness envelop him. His surroundings were a whirl of colors and shapes, a disorienting blur that made it difficult to focus on any one thing. He reached out to try and grab onto something, anything, but his hands passed through the swirling chaos as if it were made of smoke. With a final disorienting lurch, the world snapped back into focus. Einstein found himself lying on the grassy bank of a river, the distant sound of water rippling in his ears. He sat up, shaking his head to clear the fog of confusion. The landscape around him was unfamiliar, ancient. In the distance, he could see the silhouette of a grand city, its architecture distinctly Roman. As he scanned the horizon, his eyes widened at the sight of majestic aqueducts arcing gracefully across the landscape, their stone arches gleaming in the sunlight. Temples with marble columns soared into the sky, their pediments adorned with intricate carvings of gods and mythic scenes. The roads, paved with meticulously laid stones, stretched out like ribbons, leading to bustling markets filled with vibrant colors and lively sounds. Einstein marveled at the sight of chariots racing down the wide avenues, the horses' hooves pounding rhythmically against the stones, and vendors shouting their wares in melodic Latin. Einstein felt a surge of awe and wonder, realizing that he had been transported to a time when Rome's splendor still shimmered faintly, though its grandeur had softened by the passage of time. Amidst the breathtaking architecture and ornate structures, subtle hints of wear and tear whispered of an empire in transition. Yet to Einstein's eyes, captivated by the moment, Rome remained a vision of unparalleled beauty. The scientist stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the breathtaking scene before him. No amount of textbooks or lectures could have prepared him for this moment, standing amidst the remnants of history come alive. Utterly captivated by the scene, he allowed himself to be swept away by the grandeur of ancient Rome. The dangers of this unfamiliar era seemed distant, mere whispers in the wind compared to the majesty unfolding around him. In this moment, he surrendered to the enchantment of the past, knowing that his journey had only just begun. Act 2. In a grand but dilapidated palace in Rome, young Romulus Augustulus sat slumped on a marble bench, feeling the weight of an empire on his slender shoulders. That weight bore down on Romulus Augustulus like a debilitating force. The flickering torchlight cast long shadows across the ornate but faded tapestries that adorned the walls, remnants of Rome's former glory. His mind was heavy with worry, his thoughts consumed by the challenges that faced his rule. As the newest and youngest emperor of the Western Roman Empire, Romulus was keenly aware of the immense responsibility that rested on him. He sighed deeply and looked out at the sprawling gardens that surrounded his palace, his eyes tracing the paths that wound between overgrown hedges and ancient statues. Romulus's fingers drummed anxiously on the bench, his nails leaving small indentations in the soft stone. His eyes, tired from countless sleepless nights, stared blankly at the swaying branches of an olive tree. A heavy breeze rustled the nearby trees and poured in through the palace columns. The gust arrived at the same time as a familiar voice. Romulus felt a shiver run down his spine. The heavy palace doors swung open with a creak, and Orestes strides into the hall, his presence commanding and imposing. His armor gleamed even in the dim light, a stark contrast to Romulus's simple robes. Orestes' eyes, sharp and unyielding, bore down on his son with a mixture of disappointment and frustration. The boy quickly stood up.
You summoned me, father?
Romulus's voice barely above a whisper, his gaze fixed on the cold marble floor. Orestes approaches his son, his footsteps echoing in the vast hall. He looks down at the young emperor, his expression stern.
Yes, Romulus. I have summoned you because I have received word of some of your recent actions. It has come to my attention that you have been collaborating with members of the Senate. Did I consent to that?
Orestes' gaze pierces through Romulus, who seems to shrink under his father's stern gaze. The young emperor knows all too well that even slightly displeasing his father could have serious consequences. He stammers, trying to find the right words to respond.
Father, I was only trying to learn more about governing and...
But Orestes cut him off with a wave of his hand.
Enough. I don't want to hear excuses. You know better than to act without my permission, especially when it comes to matters of state. You might be the Emperor, but do not forget who put you there. You will learn to respect my authority and follow my commands.
Romulus nods profusely, his eyes still fixed on the floor.
Yes, Father. I understand.
Orestes scoffed. When he finally spoke again, his voice was a low growl.
Do you know why this empire is crumbling, boy?
Romulus dared to look up, meeting his father's fierce eyes.
But because of the enemies at our gates.
Orestes' laughter was harsh, devoid of any actual humor.
Enemies? No, it is not the enemies at our gates that weaken us. It is the weakness within. You are weak, boy.
Romulus flinched as if struck, his cheeks burning all the same.
I'll do better, Father.
He stammered, desperation creeping into his voice. Orestes shook his head, his gaze narrow and direct.
Better? You think mere promises will save this empire? An emperor must be strong, decisive, not a sniveling child who bends to the will of others.
He leaned in closer.
Do you think the people will follow a leader who cannot even stand up to his own father?
Romulus felt the sting of his father's words deep in his chest. He clenched his fists, fighting back tears.
I want to be strong, but...
But nothing. Respect is not learned. It is not given. It is taken. Earned. Or maybe I was right about you. Maybe I've spoiled you. Maybe you'll never earn it.
I will earn it, Father.
Orestes straightened, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes before wiping his face. He took a deep breath before looking out through the same window that the young emperor was staring through just moments ago.
Perhaps some fresh air will clear your head. Go on. Get out of my sight.
Romulus rose shakily, his heart heavy with the weight of his father's disapproval, yet clinging to the chance of earning his post. He fled the palace, the shadows of his father's expectations always trailing behind him. Eventually, he found himself by the banks of the Tiber River, where he sank to the ground, burying his face in his hands. It was here, in this moment of vulnerability and despair, that Romulus would encounter a stranger who would change the course of his destiny. Act 3. The golden hues of the setting sun painted the ancient vista with a warm glow. Albert stood by the banks of the Tiber River, his mind abuzz with wonder and confusion. He marveled at the grandeur of the surroundings, completely lost in thought. Meanwhile, Romulus Augustulus, burdened by the weight of his empire and his father's expectations, sought solace by the river's edge. Lost in the depths of his own uncertainty, he barely noticed the stranger who had suddenly appeared along the river's banks. Einstein, his curiosity piqued by the unfamiliar setting, wandered aimlessly, his eyes darting from one ancient artifact to another. As he approached Romulus, something subtle caught his attention, the affluent poise in Romulus's posture contrasting starkly with the burdened exhaustion etched upon his youthful face.
Quite a view, isn't it?
Einstein remarked in perfect Latin, his years of linguistic study finally paying off. His tone was gentle. He gestured to the river that surrounded them.
I've always been fascinated by the stories these ancient waterways could tell.
Romulus looked up, startled to hear a stranger's voice. He took a moment to study Einstein, noticing the man's disheveled hair and the chalk dust that still clung to his unique garments. Despite his unusual appearance, there was a warmth in Einstein's eyes that put Romulus at some ease.
Indeed, it is a sight to behold.
Einstein, simply elated to be speaking with a living Roman nobleman, was unaware of the true significance of the moment. Little did he know who exactly it was that he was speaking with, but he couldn't let such a rare encounter slip away.
Mind if I sit and join you?
Einstein asked, gesturing to the ground beside Romulus. Romulus hesitated for a moment before nodding.
Sit if you must,
he said, scooting over to make room for the stranger. He settled down next to the young nobleman, feeling the soft ground beneath him. Romulus wasn't particularly inclined for conversation, But it had been some time since he was able to talk about something other than the Holy Roman Empire and the endless stream of inquiries about his plans to restore it to its former glory. It was a welcomed reprieve to discuss anything else.
You're not from around here, are you?
Einstein chuckled softly, shaking his head.
Haha, no, I'm not. I come from a place very distant from here.
He paused, reflecting on the vast differences between their two eras.
But I've always been fascinated by Rome. Your people have left an unmistakable mark on the world, influencing even the far reaches of where I come from.
He glanced over at Romulus, who looked at him incredulously.
You cannot be from very far. Your accent is barbarian. Are you Alemanni?
Einstein laughed gently, his eyes crinkling at the corners.
Ha 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 ha. No, not exactly. I come from a place far beyond the reach of the Alemanni, a place where the written word is plentiful and knowledge is cherished, a place where we strive to understand the mysteries of the world.
Romulus looked at him, intrigued.
A place where knowledge is cherished. Sounds like a dream.
Einstein, sensing the young emperor's longing, couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. He knew all too well the importance of knowledge and the power it holds. He took a deep breath, contemplating how much to reveal to this stranger.
Perhaps it is, but it is not without its own challenges.
The conversation between Albert and Romulus unfolded slowly, punctuated by long, reflective pauses. The sinking sun painted the sky in hues of crimson and gold, eventually yielding to the embrace of night. In the quiet darkness, their exchange took on a more intimate tone, the distant echoes of the bustling city fading into a tranquil symphony of cicadas and rustling leaves. Einstein couldn't help but notice the subtle details that hinted at Romulus's true identity. The finely embroidered insignia on his robe, the regal bearing in his stance, and the weight of responsibility that seemed to hang heavy upon his shoulders. The two didn't speak for some time, allowing the rustling branches to mingle for a beat.
A man of few words, I see. But I have a feeling there's more to you than meets the eye, sir.
Romulus raised an eyebrow.
Perhaps, though I hope the burdens I bear are not so readily apparent.
Einstein nodded in understanding, sensing the weight of Romulus's unspoken words.
Ah, the hidden burdens, the ones that shape us, even when no one else can see.
Indeed.
Romulus replied, his voice tinged with a hint of emotion. The boy's expression softened. Though the man was an odd stranger, there was no hint of malice in his approach. Instead, his tone carried a rare compassion, something seldom extended to someone of Romulus's stature.
But it is not your burdens that I speak of. You must have great responsibilities, and yet your curiosity shines through.
Romulus looked at Einstein.
You think so?
Einstein smiled.
I know so. I've taught long enough to recognize that glimmer. Your mind is clearly hungry for knowledge, eager to learn, and that is a rare and beautiful thing.
Romulus sighed.
I just have a lot to learn right now.
Albert Einstein notices the heaviness in Romulus's voice.
We all do, but never forget that curiosity is a powerful tool. Knowledge can guide you, and even lighten the load of your burdens.
Romulus took a deep breath. There was a certain freedom in speaking with a foreigner, someone who had no stake in Roman politics or personal ambitions. In these tumultuous times, trust was a rare commodity, and Romulus felt he could be more candid with this wise stranger than with his closest advisors, or even his father for that matter. He hesitated before voicing his deepest concern.
But what if these burdens are too great?
Einstein looks over to Romulus, his demeanor earnest.
Facing burdens is like facing any complex idea, be it math, war, philosophy. At first it may seem confusing, but if you break it down, it becomes clearer. Knowledge is grasping the concepts, while wisdom is knowing how to apply them in your life.
Romulus nodded, absorbing Einstein's words.
But where does one find such wisdom? Did your teachers impart it to you?
He asked, curiosity shining in his eyes. Einstein smiles.
Wisdom is not something that can be found. but rather something that is gained through experience and introspection. It's about learning from both your successes and failures, and using that knowledge to make better decisions in the future.
Romulus considers this for a moment, his expression thoughtful.
I suppose that makes sense. But what if I cannot afford to make a mistake?
Einstein pondered the question, his eyes taking on a faraway look as he contemplated the immense responsibility that must come with being an emperor.
Well, one must remember that mistakes are a natural part of the learning process. It is impossible to avoid them entirely, but it is how we respond to those mistakes that defines us. By learning from them and adjusting our actions, we grow stronger and wiser.
Romulus turned slightly, now facing his guest.
You truly speak as though you hail from a land that values knowledge deeply.
Einstein smiled, his eyes gleaming with excitement.
Indeed, I do. Though we would be nothing without the progress brought on by Rome. In my land, we have made great strides in understanding this world and everything beyond it.
Your people sometimes sound more like myth than reality.
Romulus remarked with some doubt, though his eyes remained wide with fascination. Einstein chuckled at the young emperor's reaction.
With all of these strides, your region must experience great peace. Rome is plagued by barbarians who would slaughter their mothers for a plot of land and a title. No offense.
The renowned physicist pondered the world he had left behind, one still engulfed in constant conflict. Technological advancements seemed to have only escalated the brutality of every disagreement. He had always been outwardly anti-war, advocating for peace and understanding among nations. Yet here he was, confronted with the harsh reality of humanity's relentless cycle of conflict.
Advancements don't always bring the peace we hope for. Sometimes they only amplify the struggles we face.
Romulus observed Einstein's somber demeanor, sensing a deeper pain behind his words.
You speak as one who has witnessed the horrors of war firsthand.
The two shared a look of mutual understanding, a heaviness settling over Einstein.
Indeed. I've seen the devastation it leaves in its wake. The lives lost, the families torn apart. It's a pain that lingers long after the battles have ended.
Romulus listened in solemn silence, his heart heavy with empathy for the man before him.
War has left its mark on us all. I have only ever known peace within the walls of Rome, but I have heard the whispers of what lies beyond. I fear for my people, for our future. I do not know how much longer we keep these walls up.
Romulus wanted to say so much more. Nobody ever just listened to his worries, not without wanting something in return. Einstein, sensing Romulus's hesitation, offered a reassuring smile.
You know, sometimes the heaviest burdens become lighter when shared, even if just in words.
Romulus looked at the kind stranger, his gaze thoughtful. He sat with the stranger's words, weighing their truth. Finally, he took a deep breath and began to share his fears.
What is your father like? Do you still speak with him?
Einstein was caught off guard by the vulnerability in the young emperor's question.
My father, he was a complicated man whose father isn't. He had high expectations. Our relationship was strained at times, but we still shared moments of understanding and connection. He came from a different era, one that's hard to explain. Sadly, he passed away when I was quite young. I still remember our conversations, though. I carry those lessons with me always.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. Though it has been many years, I still miss him dearly.
Romulus hesitates before asking his next question.
Do you think your father would be proud of you if he could see you now?
Einstein considers the question, his expression thoughtful.
I'd like to believe he would. If he could see the future, I think he'd be amazed at how far we've come.
He gazes into the distance, recalling his father's dreams and aspirations for him.
My father was a man of great intellect, and I think he would be proud of the strides I've made. However, I cannot help but feel at times that his expectations for me went beyond academia.
My father. He expects great things from me as well, but I fear I may fall short. I am not the warrior he wishes me to be, nor am I the leader he desires. I am simply a young man, lost in the shadows of this great empire, trying to find some way. Daily, I fear that I may disappoint him, just as I fear disappointing my people. I want to do what is right, but I am unsure of what that even means sometimes.
Einstein retorts, his voice sounding almost personal this time.
You are not responsible for living up to his dreams. You are responsible for forging your own path and finding your own purpose. Your father's expectations should not define your worth or limit your potential. Furthermore, does your vision of the future align with his at all?
My vision?
Romulus furrowed his brows in thought.
I suppose I do have a vision for the future. It is still taking shape. What I truly yearn for is a time when Rome can flourish in peace without the constant threat of war and turmoil. I want to see my people prosper, to indulge in the arts and sciences, to learn, to build and thrive. I wish to leave a legacy that benefits not just my empire, but the entire world.
Einstein chuckled before patting the young man on the shoulder.
Now, that's a noble vision, one that I believe we share in some way. You are correct about this, however. In the face of uncertainty, knowledge is our greatest weapon. Embrace it, young emperor, and you will wield a force more potent than any single army.
Albert began to reflect. What role did he, a man of science and reason, have to play in a world steeped in tradition and myth? How could his knowledge of the universe possibly make a difference in a world torn apart by centuries of conflict and strife?
I'm not sure why I'm here in Rome,
he confessed, his voice for the first time tinged with some hesitance and uncertainty.
but something tells me there's a reason, a purpose that's yet to reveal itself.
Yet despite his doubts, there was a flicker of something deep within him, a glimmer of hope that whispered of possibilities yet unseen. Perhaps, he mused, his presence in Rome was not a mere coincidence, but a chance to make a difference, to leave a mark on history in a kind of way he had never imagined. As the two gazed out at the ancient city, bathed in the royal blue hues of a reflecting moon against the Tiber, Einstein couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder once again. For in that moment, they together glimpsed the potential for a future yet unwritten, a future where knowledge and understanding could pave the way to a better world.
Maybe you should stay for a while. I might need some help.
Act 4. Einstein wandered through the palace halls, wide-eyed and slack-jawed. Rome. He had never thought he'd step foot in this ancient city, not in his wildest dreams. Mussolini had kept Italy out of reach during his time. But here, now, centuries away from that tyrant, it was as though a weight had lifted from his soul. The demands of the modern world, the pressure from governments to churn out breakthroughs like a machine, gone. No wars that threatened to destroy humanity. No bureaucratic nonsense. Hell, no wife. He chuckled, a thought flickering through his mind. Elsa Lowenthal, his wife. She was back in his own time, blathering about fashion and the latest celebrity scandals, as if that shit mattered. She was never one for deep thoughts or intellectual pursuits. No, she'd rather drone on about some new boutique opening on the corner than even attempt to grasp his scientific theories. He tolerated her at best. He met her at a family reunion. He was immensely attracted to her because of how much she resembled his own mother. Not in a weird way, though, but he never dared lay with her without protection. In fact, he was the first person to invent the condom for this very reason. He had seen children who are conceived from close relatives, and he didn't want to have a child who was dumber than him. Which is why he had several bastards with a woman named Mileva Maric, a fellow scientist at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physics. He loved his bastards dearly, Liesel Snow, Hans Snow, and Edward Snow, all of them his beautiful children, but he was admittedly a bit of a detached man. He loved them from afar, sending them textbooks he had written as gifts in the mail. He told himself that when they start showing intellectual promise, would he take them under his wing and really begin to raise them. But that day never came. They died in Hitler's damned war, sent to Auschwitz with the rest of his people, all while he was in America helping the United States build that damned atomic bomb. It was his greatest regret in life to not make himself more known in his children's lives. He wanted to forget his pain, but he just couldn't. It didn't matter that he buried himself in his work. He already did that. It was everything. He couldn't avoid the newspapers, the radio commentary, the people not being able to talk about anything other than the war. How could they not? With General Marcus Eastwood taking control of the country, the internment camps not just for Japanese, but all non-whites, the multiple attacks on US soil, it felt like nowhere was safe. But here, there was none of that. With every step Einstein took within the grand halls of the palace, his eyes widened in awe at the sheer opulence and grandeur that surrounded him. His eyes darted from one massive painting to another. Scenes of war, glory, and bloodshed splashed across the walls.
Pretty cool stuff, huh?
Romulus chuckled at Einstein's obvious fascination. Einstein tore his gaze from a portrait of Romulus's ancestors gutting a barbarian king, a look of fascination on his face.
Indeed it is,
he replied, his voice echoing off the marble walls.
I want to do that. Make Rome more like my ancestors. I hope to continue their legacy, to continue my father's legacy.
Einstein smiled awkwardly at the poor nervous boy. He remembers what happens to Romulus in the history books. Treated like the fool king, even treated as evil for all of his bad choices, choosing war when it wasn't necessary. But seeing the boy now, he can tell that those things he heard were just fictions created over centuries of telephone. He was just a nervous boy thrown into the lion's den, trying to live up to legends bigger than he could ever comprehend. Einstein shoved his hands into his pockets, voice softening.
Listen, son. The first step to becoming a ruler who's more than just a name in a history book isn't swinging a sword. It's gaining knowledge. It's understanding the world before you try to change it. Know why Augustus was feared? Because he understood his enemies. He studied their tactics, their culture, their fears.
Romulus swallowed, glancing down as they approached a massive set of doors.
And where does that start?
Einstein grinned wide.
The library.
The heavy doors groaned open, revealing the grand library of Alexandria, Rome's greatest treasure. Scrolls and books lined the shelves, stretching into the distance beyond sight. A vast archive of everything: philosophy, science, magic, history, the kind of knowledge that could topple kingdoms or build empires. Einstein's heart pounded. This was the real power of Rome. Not those fucking paintings, not the swords. This was it, the treasure trove that could make or break a king. Romulus stood frozen, wide-eyed.
I've never seen anything like it. I never stepped foot in this place. My father always told me this library was for pussies and limp dicks.
In my experience, a man who doesn't read has a limp mind,
Einstein said, stepping inside, fingers trailing across the spines of ancient texts.
This is where you start. You want to be more than just another ruthless, limp-minded ruler who rushes into battle. Read, learn, understand.
Romulus hesitated, glancing at the shelves, then back at Einstein.
But how do I know what to study?
Einstein let out a short laugh, shaking his head.
That's the thing. You don't. Not yet.
He grabbed a scroll off the nearest shelf, tossing it to Romulus.
Just start anywhere.
Days blurred together as Romulus fell into a relentless routine. At dawn, he stood beside his father in court, enduring a constant barrage of criticism. His posture, his decisions, hell, even the way he fucking breathed, seemed to irritate the old man. Afternoons were no kinder. He trained with Rome's most decorated generals, men who lived and breathed war, their swords gleaming as bright as their egos. General Maximus in particular pushed him hard, bruising both his body and his pride. Every mistake was punished with a quick strike to remind him that a king couldn't afford to fuck up. A missed parry, a harsh slap across the cheek, a misstep in footwork, a boot to the gut. By the time supper rolled around, Romulus was battered, his muscles aching, but the nights, that's when he could breathe. While the rest of Rome slept, Romulus would slip away to the library where Einstein waited, hidden in the labyrinth of scrolls and tomes. He had insisted they keep their meeting secret. The palace was full of snakes, concerned more with appearances and the smoothness of one's Latin than the sharpness of one's mind. Einstein, with his now incredibly sweaty and smelly lab coat and foreign accent, would have been an instant target. To most, Einstein was just another servant, someone lowborn, beneath notice. That suited them both fine. The fewer eyes on their meetings, the better. It wasn't about glory here. It wasn't about looking like a leader. It was about becoming one. The two would sit for hours, poring over ancient texts, deciphering forgotten strategies, lost sciences, hidden histories. Einstein spoke with a ferocity that mirrored the battles Romulus fought during the day, but here the blows were intellectual. Each book opened was another battlefield. Each discovery was a new weapon. Einstein sat back, crossing his arms, and stared at Romulus with a grin that felt like both a challenge and an invitation.
All right, let's test your progress. Tell me, Romulus, who was the emperor who expanded the empire to its greatest size? Who made Rome the envy of the world?
Trajan. Under his rule, Rome stretched from Britannia to Mesopotamia. His military campaigns crushed all opposition, but it was his diplomacy that allowed him to maintain control. Even the Senate couldn't deny his greatness.
Einstein's eyes gleamed, impressed.
Exactly. Trajan. A visionary in many ways. You've come a long way, son.
Romulus slumped, his shoulders sinking under the weight of memories.
Yeah, but look at us now. Trajan built an empire that stretched across the world, and we're stuck defending our walls. It wasn't like this before. Back when the gods still favored us, things were different. I still question Constantine's choice. When he made Rome Christian, it's like everything went to shit.
Einstein leaned forward, his expression shifting to something more serious.
The gods?
He asked, eyebrow arched.
You believe in the gods?
Romulus looked back at him, surprised by the question.
Of course I do. Everyone does. The gods shape our every moment. They watch us, test us, and punish us when we stray. And man, did we stray?
Einstein smiled. He remembered when he still believed in God. The days when his mother would read him silly stories about ultra instinct and bizarre tales like Shem nutting in Japheth's wife from the Torah, but he was a man of science now.
Listen, Romulus, I get it. I used to believe in God, too. I used to think there was some grand plan or cosmic game being played. But let me tell you something. Don't rely on them. The gods don't decide your fate, and neither does any messiah or miracle. You control your destiny. Trust this.
He tapped Romulus lightly on the side of his head.
Not whatever gods you think are watching.
Before Romulus could respond, the heavy doors to the library creaked open and a tall figure strode in. General Maximus. His armor clinked as he walked, the weight of his gaze landing on Einstein, suspicion flickering across his face.
Romulus,
Maximus said, his voice dripping with disapproval.
I thought I'd find you here. And who's this?
His eyes narrowed at Einstein, taking in the stranger's foreign appearance. Romulus straightened, a flicker of unease crossing his face.
General, this is my advisor.
Advisor?
He didn't bother to hide his contempt.
Emperor Romulus, a messenger from the border has arrived. It's urgent. The Alemanni are at our gates. They demand an audience with you.
Einstein glanced at Romulus, the unspoken tension heavy between them. Maximus turned on his heel, already marching out of the library.
With me? No. He should speak with my father. I'm not equipped for dealing with foreign enemies yet.
Maximus remained stone-faced.
Emperor, I'm afraid that barbarian King Odoacer wants to speak only to you. He doesn't trust your father since he ordered the slaughter of his daughters.
Romulus winces at the memory. His father, Orestes, had brokered peace with the Alemanni once, only to betray them with such cruelty. On the day of the supposed treaty, Orestes had launched a blitz on the Alemanni strongholds, capturing Odoacer's daughters. They hadn't died quick. Orestes had them poisoned, choking on toxic fumes concocted by the Grand Maester, their limp bodies strung up in the palace rafters for months like a decoration, all to send a message to not just the Alemanni but all the barbarians outside their walls. It was a tactic that Romulus and many in the Senate viewed to be excessive, but there was no denying that it did halt barbarian attacks in the coming years.
I'm sorry. I just don't think I can talk to him. I'm terrified.
He glanced at Maximus, desperate for reassurance, but finding none. Maximus looks at him so disappointed. He had watched Romulus grow from boy to man, had expected more. Now all he saw was a coward.
I expected more from you, sir.
Romulus flinched. He had the authority to not take comments like that from subordinates, but he was just too much of a little bitch. He turned his gaze toward Einstein, as if hoping for a way out. This caught Maximus's attention.
And who the fuck are you?
Just a lowly scholar, seeking knowledge, nothing more.
Maximus didn't budge. His eyes narrowed, scanning Einstein like a predator considering whether to pounce. He took out his blade from its sheath.
A lowly scholar? You don't look like one. You talk strange. You reek of foreign blood.
Romulus, still pale and shaken, found his voice.
Maximus, stop.
His words were frail, lacking conviction.
He's with me.
Maximus hesitated, then slowly lowered his blade, though his expression remained distrustful.
Forgive me, Emperor, but I don't trust outsiders, and neither should you, especially ones that talk as strange as this one.
Einstein exhaled shakily, his pulse racing. He adjusted his collar, trying to maintain a facade of calm, though inside he was boiling with indignation.
You have sharp instincts, but I assure you, my only weapons are words and ideas. No threat to you, I promise.
Maximus grunted, clearly unimpressed, but he stepped back, sheathing his sword. Romulus wiped his sweaty palms on his tunic.
Where is King Odoacer now?
Outside the city gates. He brought 2,000 men. Enough to lay siege if our defenses fail.
Romulus's heart raced.
Oh, God. What should I do? How should I approach this?
He looked desperately between Maximus and Einstein, searching for guidance. Maximus's approach was immediate and fierce, his jaw clenched, muscles tense with the anticipation of battle.
Show no weakness,
he barked, eyes flashing with the fire of a seasoned warrior.
You go out there with your head high, and you don't flinch. Odoacer is a barbarian bastard. He'll smell fear on you like a rabid dog. You look him in the eye, and you make it clear that Rome will stand. We go out there and put his head on a fucking spike.
Maximus took a step closer, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his sword.
You give him no quarter. You remind him what your father did to his daughters. Let him and all the damned barbarians around the world know you'll do worse if they threaten this city. Rome has faced down worse than Odoacer.
Einstein, standing to the side, shook his head slightly.
No. Romulus, brute force won't always be the answer. Not when we're this close to the edge. If you charge in with threats and aggression, Odoacer will take it as a challenge. And then you'll have 1,000 angry men smashing through your gates. Who knows how many regular people out in the city who will suffer if you go in so recklessly.
He stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Romulus's shoulder again, ignoring the glare from Maximus.
You need to be smart about this. Offer Odoacer something he wants, a way out without losing face. Maybe even propose a truce, something temporary to buy us time. Talk to him. He's already lost his daughters to your father's cruelty. He's hurting. Use that. Appeal to his pain, his pride. Make him feel like he has something to gain without lifting a sword.
Maximus scoffed.
Talk? This is Rome, not some fucking debate class. Odoacer doesn't want words. He wants power, revenge. Show him you've got the balls to defend what's yours, or he'll rip it from your hands.
Einstein's eyes narrowed.
No. Look at your history as we have been. Every act of violence your people have committed comes back to haunt you eventually. Romulus, use your mind, not just your sword. Diplomacy, reason. Hell, even manipulation. You don't have to spill blood today if you're smart about this.
Romulus looked between the two men, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Maximus, the embodiment of strength and rage, represented everything he feared about stepping into his father's shadow. But Einstein, with his calm intellect, offered a path that didn't rely on brute force alone. A path that he desired. He felt like his mind was going to explode. The decision paralysis was killing him. Maximus looked at Romulus with contempt that he would even ask this.
It's your choice, Emperor. But if you ask me, it's a simple one. Fight or fucking die.
Einstein's voice was quieter but no less urgent.
Or you can live to fight another day, Romulus. And maybe, just maybe, win the war without having to spill every drop of blood in Rome.
Romulus's breath came in shallow gasps as he stammered.
I need to talk to my father. He will be very mad if I...
Emperor Romulus, there is no time. Your father is on a hunting trip and is not expected to be back until tonight. Odoacer is not a man known for his patience, especially after what your father did to his daughters.
His cold gaze pierced through Romulus as if daring him to delay further. Romulus trembled, his mind racing.
What about the Senate? There's a lot of them. That's a lot of brain power, and
Einstein stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Romulus's shoulder.
Trust in your own brain power, son.
Einstein said warmly. Those words were what he wished he'd told his own children, the faith he never instilled in them. Romulus swallowed hard. His eyes darted from Maximus's stern expression to Einstein's calm reassurance. He trailed off, trying to find the courage inside him. His pulse thundered in his ears. Maximus looked like he was about to snap, his hand still hovering over his sword.
Make a decision, Emperor. Now.
Romulus straightened, forcing a steady breath.
Okay,
He said, voice shaking but resolute.
Round up the troops. We head towards the gates immediately.
Maximus gave a curt nod, already turning to relay the command. Einstein smiled softly, stepping back but staying close. But as Romulus steeled himself for the inevitable confrontation with Odoacer, a sickening thought gnawed at the back of his mind. Was he about to become just like his father? Act 5. Outside the gates of Rome, the sun beat down upon a sea of brutal, savage warriors. Odoacer's men, the Alemanni, sprawled across the plains like wild animals ready to pounce. They were fierce, untamed, and loyal only to their blood king. Their skin was painted with tribal markings, their bodies lean and hardened by combat. Weapons of iron and bone clanged against their armored belts, and each warrior sat atop a powerful steed, snorting and pawing at the dirt as if they too longed for the bloodletting to begin. But none among them held the air of dominance that Karl Odoacer commanded. He was a mountain of a man, standing way taller than any of his soldiers, his body scarred from 1,000 battles. He was a total beast of a man in just his stature. In Alemanni culture, all men were to wear a braid. The braid was only cut once a warrior had been bested in combat to signify their loss. Odoacer had never cut his braid. Around him, the Alemanni spoke in guttural tones, laughing and drinking from animal skins filled with fermented blood wine. They reveled in their savagery, embracing death as a glorious fate, so long as it came with sword in hand. King Odoacer raised his hand and his warriors fell silent. He could sense that the emperor was near. Romulus stood before the towering gates of Rome, his heart hammering in his chest, drowning out the clamor of the assembled soldiers. He could feel their eyes on him, scrutinizing, judging. 2,000 warriors stood ready behind him, armed and bristling with anticipation, but he didn't share their anticipation. Einstein stood by his side, increasingly pale, his fingers twitching with anxiety. This was not the scholarly life in Rome he had envisioned. What the hell was he going to do if the shit hit the fan? Die? He would definitely die. Maximus rode up alongside him, a smug grin plastered across his face.
You look afraid, Outlander. Why? Aren't those fellow barbarians out there?
How many times do I have to tell you? I'm not a barbarian, damn it.
Einstein shot back, his voice shaking slightly, betraying his nerves.
Then what are you, Einstein? Stein? Sounds fucking barbaric if you ask me.
Einstein narrowed his eyes, rage bubbling just below the surface.
This world is a lot bigger than you will ever realize.
Germanic cunt.
Romulus couldn't stand the bickering.
Both of you, please stop. Maximus, please do not ever speak with that rhetoric again. You know my father himself was of Germanic descent. Do you consider him to be a barbarian?
No, sir, but your father had to have been chosen by Ra himself to rise through Rome's ranks the way he did. He may not be Roman in blood, but he's Roman where it counts.
Romulus nodded, not allowing himself to dwell on the insecurity creeping in like a shadow. What if he wasn't Roman where it counted? A flicker of doubt threatened to consume him, but he pushed it aside with fierce determination. He was the emperor. If his father was chosen by Ra, then so was he.
Open the gates!
He commanded nervously. The heavy wooden doors creaked and groaned as they swung outward, revealing the savage scene beyond. The sun blazed down on Odoacer and his horde, illuminating the fierce faces of the Alemanni warriors. The air was thick with the promise of violence. Romulus took a deep breath. As Romulus stepped through the gates, he could feel the heat of the sun and the intensity of the thousands of eyes trained on him. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. He walked ahead of the Roman legion, flanked only by Einstein and Maximus, who eyed Odoacer's forces like a predator sizing up prey. Romulus swallowed hard, trying to force down the bile rising in his throat. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to retreat, to run back behind the safety of the walls. But he knew he couldn't. His father wouldn't have. Rome wouldn't forgive weakness.
King Odoacer!
Romulus called out, his voice louder than he expected, though still shaky. He locked eyes with the towering brute.
I have come to speak with you as a man, not as an enemy.
Maximus winces a bit at those words. He was hoping Romulus would immediately cut off Odoacer's head. He looks at Einstein and scowls. Einstein silently smiles as he watches. Odoacer's lips curled into a disdainful smile.
A man? You? All I see is a child wearing his father's armor.
His horde erupted into cruel laughter. Maximus snarled under his breath, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword tighter. He leans over to Romulus.
Let me kill him now. One strike, Romulus, and it's over.
Romulus raised his hand, signaling Maximus to stay his blade.
King Odoacer, I know what my father did to your daughters.
The words felt like ash in his mouth. He had to be careful. He had to show strength, but also, if Einstein was right, an opening for peace.
I won't defend his actions. He wronged you. He wronged your people. But this doesn't have to end with more blood.
Odoacer's laughter was cruel, echoing across the open field.
No more blood. Your father burned my villages, slaughtered my kin, took my daughters, and now you speak to me of peace, boy.
His eyes blazed with fury as he took a step forward, his sheer size dwarfing Romulus.
Your words are as weak as your rule.
Romulus felt Einstein shift nervously beside him.
This isn't about weakness. This is about saving both our people from more destruction. You know what war will bring. Death, ruin. It doesn't have to be that way.
The barbarian king spat on the ground.
Rome has already destroyed my people. There's no saving them. The only thing left is revenge. I will tear this city apart, brick by brick, and make sure every Roman feels the pain I've carried.
Maximus leaned in, his voice barely a whisper, but seething with frustration.
There's no reasoning with him. Let me cut him down.
Romulus felt the weight of Maximus's words and the intensity of Odoacer's glare bearing down on him like a crushing force. His resolve wavered, but he wouldn't allow himself to fall back on the brutal tactics of his father.
I can make it up to you. What was done to your villages was wrong. I cannot bring back your daughters, but I can give you something else.
What are you doing, Emperor?
I'm listening.
I could give you Gallia Narbonensis.
All of it?
He says with a smile.
Sir, what the fuck are you doing? Gallia Narbonensis is a vital region. It's the buffer between Rome and the Germanic tribes. You give that up, you expose our borders. Do you not understand that?
Romulus could feel his hands sweating as the gravity of Maximus's words began to sink in. Provincia Gallia Narbonensis was Rome's shield, and offering it up could doom them all. Yet the words had already left his mouth, and Odoacer's grin widened. He had gone too far now to backtrack. Einstein, not fully understanding the ins and outs of their geopolitical situation, also finds himself feeling hesitant. It sounds to him like Romulus is giving more than he should. They never went over geography during their lessons.
Romulus, maybe we should, reconsider this. There's bargaining, sure, but there's also not handing the enemy your front door. I mean, I'm not a military guy, but this doesn't feel like the best play.
I know what I'm doing.
He didn't. He was merely riding the vibes, and it seems like good things were happening from how Odoacer was responding. He wasn't thinking about the long-term consequences or the political implications. Odoacer chuckled darkly.
I like what I'm hearing, Roman. But land alone isn't enough. My daughters are gone thanks to your father. I demand new ones. 100 women from your city as slaves. They will bear me sons. They will continue my bloodline.
Done!
Maximus's eyes widened in disbelief.
What the hell are you doing? You can't just give him a province and now slaves. Romulus, this is madness.
Maximus nearly drew his sword then and there, his hand trembling in fury.
You would sell out our own people like cattle for this savage's whims. Romulus, you've lost your mind.
Einstein grabbed Romulus's arm, a look of panic spreading across his face.
Wait, hold on. I didn't think we were... This isn't right. You can't give him women, Romulus. This isn't civilized.
But Odoacer was smiling now, a wide, cruel smile that revealed jagged teeth. He stepped forward, closer to Romulus, towering over him like a mountain ready to crush.
Good. You're smarter than your father. You understand how the world works, strength and sacrifice. That's the way of things.
Romulus felt sick, the bile rising in his throat. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He thought he could negotiate, find a way to spare the city from the sword. But now, standing in the shadow of Odoacer, he realized too late that he had been swept into the current of something far darker than he had anticipated. Maximus's voice cut through the suffocating tension.
This is treason. You've betrayed Rome, and for what? To appease him? What would your father think of you now?
Romulus didn't answer. He couldn't. He had made his choice, and the weight of it felt like a noose tightening around his neck. All he could do now was hope that it would be enough to keep Rome from burning. Odoacer, satisfied, stepped back with a grin that sent chills down Romulus's spine.
Prepare the women, and I will take Gallia Narbonensis when I'm ready. If you fail to deliver, Roman, I will come back with fire.
As Odosa and his horde turned to leave, Romulus stood frozen, the enormity of what he had done settling in like a cold, suffocating fog. Maximus glared at him, his face filled with disgust and betrayal. Even Einstein, who had supported the idea of negotiation, looked deeply unsettled. Romulus was alone, and he had just made a deal with the devil. As the gates closed, slammed shut them, Romulus could do nothing but fall to his knees and sob. The weight of his own foolish decision hitting him like a fist to the gut. Soldiers looked at him with disdain. They spat at the ground, some at him. One man kicked dirt toward Romulus as he passed, sneering,
"This is what we've come to? Following a spineless bitch."
The murmurs were already spreading like wildfire through the streets. Rome wasn't just angry, it was boiling over, and Romulus could feel the heat rising. They knew about the deal. 100 women, their sisters, their daughters, would be sent as tribute, fucking slaves, to a barbarian warlord, all to save his own skin. The very idea churned the stomach of the city, and the Senate would be baying for blood soon enough. His blood. A soldier held Einstein as Maximus, raw fury coursing through him, rained down blows. Einstein's face was a grotesque ruin of blood and swelling. Fists cracked bone, and Maximus didn't slow, didn't hesitate. Every punch came with the sickening sound of flesh breaking.
This is your fault.
Maximus roared, voice echoing with venom. He hammered his fists into Einstein's mangled face again, each blow harder than the last.
Your fucking fault that our emperor turned into this fucking weakling.
He headbutts Einstein till he collapses to the floor. Maximus wasn't done either. The veteran general stalked toward Romulus, rage boiling off him like steam. His boot collided with Romulus's ribs with a sickening crunch, sending the emperor sprawling.
Stand up, you worthless bastard!
Maximus hissed, his voice dripping venom.
You think this is how an emperor behaves? You crawl in front of us? In front of them?
He spat, his contempt heavier than the kick. Romulus struggled to breathe, the pain stabbing into his side like shards of glass. He couldn't get up. He couldn't even look up. He couldn't face the man whose respect he had shattered. He wasn't a ruler, he was a fucking child playing at ruler, and he had sold his people's dignity to avoid the blade. Maximus looks down at him, feeling a mix of feelings. He trained Romulus the way of the blade since he was a child, helped mold him best he could. He should feel something for him, but all he could feel was absolute disgust. He kicks him again. Romulus doesn't put up a fight. He knows he deserves it. Einstein groaned, half-conscious, his features beyond recognition. His mouth was a bleeding mass of shattered teeth and torn lips. He could barely whisper.
He's the emperor. You can't...
Maximus goes back to Einstein and grabbed him by the collar, his knuckles dripping with his blood.
He's no emperor of mine.
Then, with one final brutal punch, Maximus sent Einstein crumpling to the dirt, barely breathing, barely human anymore. Romulus watched, frozen, as Maximus hurled Einstein into the wagon like a broken toy. Then Maximus turned back to him. For a moment, Romulus thought he might kill him right there in the street. But no, Maximus had other plans.
You're coming with me.
Maximus growled, hauling Romulus to his feet and shoving him toward the same wagon.
We're going to talk to your father.
The palace was dark when they arrived, the halls eerily quiet. Orestes' chambers were modest, deceptively so for a man who had once held all the power of Rome in his hands. There was little decoration save for his trophies, gruesome reminders of past victories. The skulls of Odoacer's daughters sat on a shelf like grotesque ornaments, their empty eye sockets staring into nothing. Orestes had always been proud of those, a reminder that even the mighty could be broken, but tonight there would be no pride in his eyes. Maximus kicked open the door and threw Romulus to the ground. The thud of his son's body hitting the floor barely stirred Orestes. The old man rose from his chair, eyes narrowing as they flicked between Maximus and Romulus.
What is the meaning of this?
Orestes barked, his voice filling the small room with sudden authority.
You dare treat your emperor this way?
Maximus didn't flinch. His expression was stone.
Emperor, this little shit. He sold us out, Orestes. Sold our people. 100 Roman women. For nothing. For cowardice.
Romulus tried to rise, but the pain in his ribs screamed, and he crumpled again. Orestes looked down at him, his expression hard. No warmth, no fatherly concern, just cold assessment.
Is it true?
Romulus looked up at his father, tears welling in his eyes. His lip trembled, and he could barely get the words out.
I wanted to save Rome. I thought...
Orestes crossed the room in a single stride, his hand crashing across Romulus's face with a resounding slap. Romulus's head snapped to the side, blood spurting from his lip.
You thought you'd trade your way out of this like a merchant? Rome isn't a market stall, you fucking coward.
Romulus tasted the blood on his tongue, felt the humiliation burn his skin.
I tried. I thought maybe... Diplomacy.
Diplomacy? Ha! You thought diplomacy would work? With barbarians, those fuckers can barely read, and you tried to negotiate with them. They don't understand words, only blood. And you traded them our women. Our fucking women, you worthless coward!
Romulus sobbed, clutching his face, tasting the iron tang of blood in his mouth.
I'm not a fighter, father. I'm not... I never was.
The words tumbled out between gasps, between tears. Orestes' eyes darkened, his lip curling in disgust.
Not a fighter? Then why the fuck did I make you a leader? Why did I give you command over anything?
He turned on Maximus, fury brimming in his voice.
And you knew he was weak, Maximus. You knew my son was no more than a frightened boy. And yet you let him negotiate with the Alemanni.
Orestes slapped him hard. Maximus stiffened, but did not flinch. His face remained stone as he wiped the blood from his lip where Orestes' slap had split it. He stood at attention, eyes forward.
I followed the Emperor's orders. I always followed your orders when you were in charge, even when I disagreed. I did the same with your son.
Is he me? No, he is nothing like me, a fucking shadow.
Maximus stared back at Orestes, and for a moment the room fell silent. Then he took a slow breath, meeting Orestes' murderous gaze.
I'll take responsibility for this, Orestes. But there's someone else. Someone else who's more to blame.
Orestes raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting to a dangerous calm.
And who the fuck might that be?
Without a word, Maximus stepped to the door, his grip firm on something or someone hidden just beyond the threshold. He yanked hard, dragging a beaten, bloodied figure into the room and throwing him down in front of Orestes. The man hit the floor hard, coughing, choking on his own blood. Einstein, the scholar, the whisperer in Romulus's ear. A suffocating silence fell over the room. Orestes' gaze locked onto Einstein's broken form, his jaw clenched, and a thin, bitter smile tugged at the corner of his lips. It was not a smile of joy, but one of recognition. Einstein, too, recognized Orestes. Through his battered face, his eyes widened in horror.
You...
Einstein muttered, his voice barely a whisper, thick with disbelief and revulsion.
It can't be. Heinrich Himmler?
The two men stared at each other, both astonished.
Father?
Romulus croaked, still struggling to catch his breath, his confusion mounting.
What is he talking about?
But Orestes, no, Himmler, didn't answer. He loomed there, his presence an oppressive shadow in the room, the weight of the revelation hanging between him and Einstein like a blade ready to drop. For a moment, time itself seemed to twist, the old familiar cruelty resurfacing in Orestes' eyes.
Maximus Romulus. Get out.
Maximus hesitated for a heartbeat, eyes flicking between Romulus, but even Maximus knew better than to question him now. He grabbed Romulus by the arm, dragging him to his feet with a rough jerk.
But, Father...
He didn't understand. None of this made sense. Who was Himmler? How did Einstein, a man not of this land, know his father? Was it back when his father was part of his Germanic tribe?
Get out, Romulus. Now!
Maximus pulled Romulus out the door, closing it behind them with a final heavy thud. The silence that followed was deafening. Einstein lay still on the floor, his chest heaving with shallow breaths, blood trickling from the corners of his mouth. His eyes, though swollen and battered, never left Orestes.
It is you. I don't believe it. You, Heinrich fucking Himmler, Adolf Hitler's right-hand man. How the hell are you here?
Orestes' smile twisted, more a grimace than anything resembling joy.
I should be asking you the same thing, Einstein. I thought I was free from Jewish scum.
Einstein's mind was racing, the pain in his body momentarily forgotten as he grappled with the reality before him. The face, the mannerisms, that cold, methodical hatred, it was unmistakable. But how? How could this monster, this architect of genocide, be standing here in the flesh, ruling over a crumbling Roman Empire?
How? How are you even here? You should be dead. I saw the reports in the paper. You went missing after the Soviets' attack. You died, Himmler.
Orestes, Himmler, laughed, a cold, humorless sound that echoed off the walls.
Is that so hard to believe, Einstein? We were both sent back. The Führer's dream may have crumbled in the ashes of Berlin, but I survived. The gods, or perhaps fate, had other plans for me. I woke up in this world hundreds of years before I should have existed. And what did I do? I adapted. I changed my name just as I had before. Himmler and Hitler are kind of similar, don't you think? That was intentional, which is why I chose the name Orestes, he who stands on the mountain. A powerful name, don't you think? I was always made for greatness, and I wasn't going to let random time displacement stop me from achieving it. I rebuilt power, like I always do.
Einstein's blood ran cold, his breath quickened, panic setting in.
No, this can't be happening.
He looked up at Himmler, older, more hardened, but unmistakably the same ruthless man. The SS Reichsführer himself standing here, in a different era. Thoughts spiraled in Einstein's mind, each one more terrifying than the last. There was only one explanation. Whatever had flung him into this timeline, whatever force had yanked him and others from their doomed future, had brought Himmler with them just earlier, much earlier, decades earlier.
You're older.
Einstein whispered, piecing together the horrifying truth.
You've been here for years. Decades.
Nearly 50. Long enough to see the weakness of this world, and long enough to bend it to my will. These so-called barbarians, the fools in the Senate, the plebs, they're nothing. They don't understand power, not like we did in our time, not like the Reich did.
Einstein's breath came in ragged gasps as his mind tried to process the horror of it all. 50 years. Himmler had been here for 50 fucking years. He had been here, weaving his influence, controlling this ancient world, while Einstein had just arrived, barely understanding what had happened. The nightmare of the Third Reich hadn't ended in the 20th century. It had just been transplanted to a different era.
And now, I will finish what we started. Rome will rise again, stronger, purer, cleansed of weakness, just as the Führer envisioned, the First Reich, the final Reich.
Einstein's body trembled, not just from the pain, but from the sheer weight of the realization. This man, this monster, had been playing this twisted game for half a century, and no one had known.
You're insane.
Einstein spat, gathering whatever strength he could.
You'll fail, just like before. History...
History is written by the victors, Einstein. And in this world, I will be the victor.
Einstein stared up at Himmler, blood trickling from his lips, knowing with a sickening certainty that Himmler believed every word he said.
So what? Are you going to kill me?
Orestes merely smiles.
Kill you? No, my little time-traveling Jew. I have something else in mind.
The city was on edge, straining under the weight of terror and despair. Families huddled together, whispering frantic prayers, clutching their daughters like fragile treasures about to be ripped away. Many turned to Christ and begged for mercy. The air reeked of desperation. The women, the unlucky ones, could be chosen any time to become slaves. Prayers echoed through crumbling streets, and still there was no answer, no salvation. High above, the Roman gods watched, sneering from their thrones, drunk on bitterness.
Look at them.
Juno spat, her once glorious crown now a relic of faded power.
Those wretched mortals, flocking to this Christ, begging for his mercy as if he's done a damn thing for them. They've forsaken us, the very gods who shaped their worthless country. Pathetic.
Jupiter stood silent for a moment, his storm-filled eyes flickering with a contemptuous flame.
They worship a ghost, and yet it is we who remain, we who carved Rome from the bones of chaos. But now they kneel to an absentee king, while we, the true gods, are cast aside.
They forget us so easily. How quickly they abandon the ones who guided their triumphs, their wars, their very fucking lives.
They are human.
Mars growled from the corner, his crimson armor drenched in the blood of forgotten battles.
Faithless, treacherous, and weak. They need a hole to fill it. If not us, then someone else. But we can change that.
A wicked smile crept across Juno's lips.
These barbarians they fight. These Alemanni, Samnites, Volsci, whatever these worthless mortals call their packs. These godless creatures crave real gods, and we can be gods once more. The Romans and their Christ are soft, their prayers hollow. They'll remember us when their blood flows, when their screams echo across the battlefield. Then they'll wish they worshipped us still.
Rome will belong to us once again,
Jupiter declared, his massive hands curling around a glowing orb of raw power.
We built it, and we'll see it torn apart before it belongs to anyone else.
Mars grunted in agreement, his fingers twitching at the thought of bloodshed.
We should have slaughtered them all when we had the chance. Now, they think they're safe. But I've been whispering words of violence into Odoacer's ear just as you commanded, Jupiter. It will not be long before the bloodshed begins, before we tear Rome from existence and create a new civilization its place, one that will worship us and treat us like the gods that we are. Once their kin begin to die, will they realize that their Christ is nothing but a falsehood?
Juno nods her head, Hela feeling what he's saying, but as she does, her gaze turns toward the city below, her eyes narrowing.
But what of the man who is speaking with the Emperor's father?
Jupiter glanced down and looked at Einstein dismissively.
He's irrelevant. Probably just another mortal playing at being something greater.
Juno shook her head slowly, eyes sharpening like a predator locking onto its prey.
No, he reeks of something different, not of this time, same as the Emperor's father.
Of this time or not, they are both mortal. It makes no difference,
Jupiter said, though a hint of uncertainty flickered across his face.
Mortal machinations are nothing compared to the will of gods.
He's been watching, studying, the blueprints he draws when the Emperor's not looking. They're not natural. He speaks of this magic I am not aware of, science. There's something twisted about him and his words.
Jupiter's fingers tightened around the glowing orb, the image of Romulus sharpening in its light.
Whatever his intentions, Rome will fall, and when it does, we will rise again, gods of blood and ruin.
Mars's grin widened, teeth glinting.
Let the slaughter begin, and let us once again be gods.
Except they weren't gods, not really. Long ago, when the three realms began to overlap, the earth itself became a prison, a paradise for some. It was during the melding of realities that fragments of Yahweh's angels, once mighty, found themselves trapped, unable to ascend back to the higher planes. Stranded and fractured, they faced a choice: fade into obscurity or seize dominion over the mortal world. Those that chose power became what humans would later know as the gods, Greek, Norse, Mayan, and many other pantheons, beings shaped by the faith and fear of the people. But they were never true gods, just remnants of heaven clinging to their need for divinity. They called themselves names such as Zeus, Odin, Kukulkan, and in time they ruled as gods of old. Some remained tethered to the earth, building their empires on human reverence, while others fled to distant corners of the universe, seeking dominion over alien worlds. Their names whispered in worship across the stars. But not all who remained on earth thrived. In the shadows lurked those beings who could never fully claim the light, the demons. They too had been trapped by the melding of realms, forced to weave their influence subtly through the cracks in human society. Demons didn't sit on thrones or bask in mortal adulation. They infected from within, working behind the scenes, twisting thoughts and desires like parasites in the flesh of the world. They had to be subtle, too much chaos, too much blatant destruction, and they risked drawing the wrath of the archangels. But the archangels, they were gone, disappeared after the Christ Wars, leaving behind only stories and myths, pure-blooded angels, untouchable, divine. None remained to oversee the chaos. Heaven had abandoned the earth, and so the demons were free to operate unchecked. Cunning bastards that they were, they co-opted the names and legends of the old gods. Zeus, once mighty, had fallen, but in his place rose Jupiter. Ares, forgotten, but Mars. Mars could still inspire bloodlust, could still lead armies. It didn't matter if the names were hollow. It didn't matter if the mortals prayed to shadows. The demons had their hooks in deep now, wearing the faces of dead gods. Rome belonged to them, as did every empire that followed. The real gods, the angels who had once walked among men, they were nothing but dust, and in their absence the demons wore their crowns. None of it mattered anymore. Rome would burn, the people would fall, and the demons would feast on their souls. And when the smoke cleared, the mortals would forget again. They always did. Act 5. Romulus was jerking off when he